This podcast is brought to you by Steede Motor Group, Claregalway. For your personalised vehicle shopping experience, find out more at steedemotorgroup.ie. So delighted now to be joined by Maurice Brosnan. We're just going to touch on a couple of the club management appointments that have been going around Corofin and Brigid's in the Connacht final. But before we do that, we're obviously not going to name the club here now because we don't want to get ourselves in trouble or anything. But I think a lot of people are well aware of this now, that there's been a player charter going around and there's been a number of commitments for players to sign to be part of this senior hurling club team squad for the year. Firstly, Mars, it's amazing the reaction it's got on Twitter. I think it was Sunday night. It was just covered all over my feed. What have you made of the backlash of it?
Like, interesting. I don't know, Paul. I'm sure you were the same. I would have got this kind of, you get it early on WhatsApp, and you fairly quickly realize that this is going to go, everywhere. And the original version has lads' names in it and all this kind of stuff, which you're fairly skeptical about. I have to be honest. Like, I mean, my I haven't spoken about this anywhere else, and I didn't necessarily realize we were going to talk about it here. But like, if I'm brutally honest with this, like, I think that some of the reaction to this is interesting. Like, there's a tenet in stuff like this where you kind of sometimes, and I'm speaking generally here, but sometimes when something comes across your radar, whether it be in journalism or on social media or everything, you kind of have to ask a couple of questions. And there's a lot of stuff that we don't know here. So, like, we don't know the validity of this. A lot of people were speculating about the club because of the names that were attached to it. We don't know where it came from. We don't know, was this player led? Like, is it actually a dictate down to management? A lot of people seem to be assuming that it's addicted onto management. Other people, if you actually do, your due diligence, which as a journalist you kind of have to, and you ask few people about it, they might tell you otherwise. They might tell you this was driven by a leadership group or something like that. So my point here is, like, I think a lot of people are giving really forceful opinions and talking about how much of a disgrace it is, when I would question certain validity. I also think a lot of stuff, and maybe the worst thing about this is that it was put in writing. Like, I think there's clubs who would have similar thoughts about a lot of, maybe not every rule in this, in fairness, like some of them are real OTT, but they would have similar thoughts about how much of a loss it is if a fella is, going away during the summer and trying to get them back, or that kind of thing. So, but the fact that you're kind of having this hard and fast attitude about it, and then more broadly, the idea of charters themselves, I do think are a total con. Like, the more and more I think about it, I don't think any team is losing the game because they don't have a charter. I think if you're getting obsessed about that kind of the one percenters, there's bigger picture stuff. And it's one thing I would notice maybe sometimes is that sometimes, you can find players or management or whoever get obsessed about the minutiae, get really obsessed about the small details, sometimes to their detriment, not actually appreciating the bigger picture. So sometimes, lads they'll be weighing out their water, they'll, be absolutely paranoid about their macros, getting exactly the right number of protein, tracking every single food they eat, and then they turn up for training and they only give kind of a 6 out of 10, or they might skip a set at the back end of a gym session, or they might do finish out every single run. And, there's a bigger picture there that you can focus on that stuff. There's kind of technical, tactical stuff that you can drill down on. And if you're getting all that right, maybe then you can go and get obsessed about this kind of minutiae stuff. But yeah, like, broadly, despite myself, I know I do agree that you can be absolutely critical of this kind of dictate and, dictating down to players and telling them exactly what to do. But I do feel sorry for the club, because, and maybe it'll come out in time that they can clarify where exactly this all came from and what was behind it. We haven't got it yet, so I don't think that's likely. But I just think it's a more complicated situation than maybe has been depicted in certain places.
You would have a degree of sympathy for this club because everyone's seemed to have an opinion on this straight away, that it is ridiculous. And listen, some of it's ridiculous that you can't play golf after June, etc. But at the same time, is this just not what happens in a lot of clubs around the country? Obviously not to this degree, but like a lot of these charters and stuff, it's something that just seems to happen at the start of the year. Like, you could see a lot of people referencing on some podcasts that, like, this wasn't a massive surprise, that they've seen some of these being implemented before.
Well, they would have been all the range, like maybe a decade ago. You would have seen a couple of famous examples of ones that got leaked and kind of went there. I remember there was a Bridget's one, right, that really kind of caught people's attention because some of it wasn't necessarily even just how strict it was just how kind of ludicrous some of the rules are. So it would have been a thing maybe 10 years ago. I do think from a coaching education perspective, one criticism I would have from, not, and again I'm talking generally here, but I think some coaches, you don't have the famous Brendan Rodgers line, like you're training humans, not dogs. I do think there is kind of an element of some, you see it in certain elements of coaching where a lot of coaching is, kind of master pupil type stuff and really kind of dictating down to people. And I don't think that stuff has any truck in 2023. I don't think it's the recipe for success. I think a lot of clubs are a lot more progressive about that. But at the same time, the point you're making, like from a cultural perspective, there's certain clubs that have huge kind of cultural values, that have player-led meetings. You've heard Corofin talk about that a lot now over the last couple of years, about how many just player-centered meetings that they would have had, and they would drive those standards and would have kind of maybe similar rules internally that they're not enforcing them. They're just all this kind of a collective buy-in into that. So there is an element to that too, but I think that stuff probably needs to be more holistic than being handed down to teams. But I go back to my point, Paul. I'd hold my hands up. I don't know. And I think a lot of people who are talking about this don't know whether that was the case here. Are you 100% that this is being handed down to players, as in this series you have to buy in, or would it have come from somewhere else? And until you know that, I think there's no harm in we don't have to jump to massive conclusions every time something comes across our radar on Twitter. We can look at it, and you can kind of look at it and I don't know, maybe sit back and if further details might come out about this in the next couple of weeks on either end, and then maybe you can feel free to think, and you can talk generally about the idea of charges, but just this idea that going into absolute detail about this club. Like a lot of people, I've heard conversations about this nationally, and they're still speculating whether or not it's true or not. And to me, if you're speculating about anything, whether or not it's true or not, that's the time to press pause and do a bit of due diligence and actually look into it, at least confirm its validity. Like that's a basic tenet of journalism. So, that's kind of my take on it anyway.
It's came really though from the club having numerous lads away last year in America, in Canada, or wherever they were traveling.
Or people coming back, yeah. And I'm sure I would say a lot of charters come from a specific issue, and the club themselves say, like, do we need to address that? So let's drill down on that. There's one incident happens in a year, and then you try and react to it. But I really think like a lot of this stuff is, and there are subtler ways for management to try and instill a culture. There's things you could do within the club that would drive this stuff. That doesn't necessarily need to be handing them down. It can be subliminal messaging. To this, I would go right down to the minutia of every single club now, Paul, are going to do their end of the season gig. They'll have every up and down the county. They'll get together. They'll have a few drinks. They might hand out a couple of awards for the year. A big award, I think, within that, every single club should be giving out a most dedicated award or something like that. I just finished a book there recently about the Bulldogs when they won the AFL Grand Final. It was like a kind of a story to fairy tale year where they won it. But after every single year, they had a domestique, which is it's an idea from the Ryder Cup. It's the guy who does all the hard work and then clears the way for the sprinter to come up the end and win the award. So they give out that award after every game. It's the guy who does the kind of the unseen, the grunt work. And I a lot of clubs could learn from that idea. Like, if you give out something like that, like a recognition for maybe the underappreciated, the real kind of dedicated guy, and glorified it, made it a big deal. Subliminally, that just sets into everybody else's mind. They all look at that and think that's maybe a template for us. And again, this is kind of a way of driving it without. My point there is that you don't have to. It's not about cracking the whip. I don't think that works. Honestly, I think it turns people off. It drives people away. And I would say even in coaching, some drills you'd watch now, and it is really that kind of. It's not a conversation. It's not engaged with players. Some of the best coaching I've seen is the opposite. It's guys, getting in under a guy's skin. Nearly, it's more of like a friend relationship than it is like this master police with like the warden kind of stuff. Like that just doesn't have any truck anymore. I don't think people respond to that. So, but again, I see we can generally hear like on that specific case or that the supposed club, there was obviously instance this year where players were coming back late, and that had a knock-on effect. But already you're very in speculation here. I don't know if that is what drove this, and I don't think a lot of people do either.
Yeah, I thought we were really gone with the day of drinking bans and stuff at club, but I don't think we are there. Just on the club football, I suppose the Connacht Championship and everything, it's taken centre stage, but for a lot of people from the outside looking in, there's a bit of intrigue around this time of year, who's getting appointed to be different club managers. We only said off air there, but I think we were doing the first podcast this year in the club championship. It was myself, yourself, and Sean Denver, and we were talking about the stability of
Yeah.
club managers. But like, there's numerous amount of clubs now trying to look for a new man.
There is, yeah. And I think this is maybe that was my own naivety at the time. This was probably to be expected. I don't know, was that necessarily stability as it was a certain point in time where manager had just been in there for a year and like will we before next year's or in 2 years championship will we talk about stability again because there's been a lot of recent appointments and they've only got a year done. Like I think that might have just been a function of their terms as much as it was anything to do with a kind of long-term processes or anything like that. But yeah, it's like it's silly season. There's clubs up and down the county either looking or making appointments. So you've got clubs like Claregalway who went public and advertised for a position, and I don't think that position has been filled. I'd say they're fairly far down the process, and you would hear names linked to it. All right, and then across the county, then on out the West Barna, obviously are still looking for somebody. They've done it. Was over Barna last year. Was ratified as Tuam Stars manager this week. Spiddle have appointed somebody. Let the Morris fellas I know haven't. And then look the other side of the county. I think Gerald Jennings has stood down from Milltown. I don't think Carol Stratton have appointed anybody moving on from what they had last year. So it's this time of year is crazy, Paul, and it's not from a Galway perspective. It's kind of across the county, and I think a lot of clubs you've got one of two options. You can do the go public and advertise it and get people to send in their process. You could try and drive it internally and find somebody who is willing to take it on, or maybe even preferably if there's a degree of continuity, especially if you had a very good manager, which a lot of the counties clubs did last year, you would try and get somebody from that ticket to stay on and kind of continue that good work so you're not ripping it up. I think that certainly from a player's perspective, that's what they would want. So this time of year is silly season. You're gonna, and it probably feed into. I do think there is an element now. All right, you're starting to feel the pinch a small bit as you lead into December. You don't want to be just dragging into the new year is not a good thing, because even just from an S&C perspective or testing or any of that kind of stuff, you want to kind of get ahead of the curve there. I do think clubs. I think some clubs went back way too early last year, and they felt, in my opinion, they felt the punishment that you saw. I think some clubs flamed out. I don't. This idea of coming back for Christmas is ludicrous. Coming back in January is it's like it's absolutely ludicrous. And even I mean I think I know I said it to you before, and I think you're kind of your hands are tied because of when the league starts. I think February, like I training the muck and rain the pitch, and you can kind of take the lead for what it is. And I know certain teams don't want to be chasing it, but I think there's scope to push it out a small bit. So. And if the league, not to go over all ground here, but if the league was pushed back even just 2 weeks, I think that would maybe get rid of the semi-finals. That would give clubs the excuse to push it out a small bit as well. But I definitely think you're kind of you'd want to be fairly far down the road at this stage of the year, right?
Just on this, I know you had a piece in the Examiner about all the different Corofin men involved in management this year. Do you think we're even going to see more Corofin lads this year now that clubs are going to be trying to get after?
I have absolutely no doubt. Yeah, I think it's just the nature of it, the success that they've had, what the club is producing, and just the basic idea that was at the heart of that piece, which is that Corofin produce too many coaches to cater for themselves. They just don't have there's not enough spots to be filled inside that club, and it's just a natural thing that a lot of these ambitious coaches are going to end up being attracted elsewhere. And you saw it this year, like you saw, I think certain clubs got a huge lift out of Corofin men being involved across the county. And I think that only persists. I did a kicking coach to kick pass session out in Loch George 2 weeks ago, which was Galway GA organised these sessions, and it's a total testament to them. Like certain counties who, in terms of a coach education perspective, I really think Galway are ahead of the curve on this. Yeah. Like this stuff is so accessible. They do get the people who give the courses are are excellent. You know, Keane O'Neill from as well as being part of the Guide Management ticket would often give these courses. Kevin Johnson, the Corofin manager, actually gave a course the same day that I was doing one. So they are, and they're so accessible. Like they make them available on both sides of the county, kind of throughout the year. If you can set up your own coaching portal if anybody is interested, and you can see when they're accessible and sign up for them. But I think they're well worth. You'll always get a one or two nuggets out of it that is very helpful. But I did the one out in Loch George, and Gary Sice was giving it, and so Gary Sice was there with John Divley on, and it was excellent. But just to watch how these were the under. I knew a couple of them. I think they were the under 15s or the under 16s. There's a couple of Bish lads there who would have been so last year's Galway development panel under 15s, I'd say, who were 16 this year. So it was a bunch of them who were being coached, and we were all watching. And to watch the development in a young lad who maybe streaky confidence, definitely wasn't going to try his weaker foot, kick passes kind of spraying all over the pitch, body kind of hunched over, a bit off the start to the end, where spraying ball off both feet, total and utter confidence, and how someone like Gary Sice was able to get in under his skin, kind of gently encourage him along, a couple of really pointing cues, things like how you move your body. Let's say if you're talking about the angle of a kick pass, how you can lead the kicker, communicate with him without necessarily words. So if you turn your chest out to the sideline and make a break there, that's exactly where you want the ball. All that kind of subtle stuff that he was able to kick him with the instep, all the classic Corofin cues that you would hear over time, how he was able to get that fella from there to the end. For me, anyway, it was a remarkable insight into what drives that club. A guy like Gary Sice now, for example, I'd say would be a very successful coach as it goes on, judged off what I saw there. But also, it's a testament to why you would want someone like that in your club. Like, if you can get that development in a session, can you imagine that over a season? So yeah,
I can already see a few clubs after Gary Sice for next year.
yeah.
And that's not saying he's like going to retire anything, because we see Mike Farrer this year at intermediate. I think that's probably going to encourage some intermediate clubs now, saying, well, they're not going to be playing in this championship, so to go after him.
Great point. Yeah, a great point, especially how well that was balanced. Even I would have had I'll hold my hands up. I would have questioned that, not in terms of his knowledge or anything like that, but just how is it going to work if, as happened this year, you get an intermediate game fixed at the same day as a senior game? How do you balance both? And as it turned out, it wasn't an issue. That they actually did it very successfully. So yeah, that's a great point. You could fully anticipate that. But there's also scope. I think there's senior clubs who will absolutely look for, there's coaches who have done great work kind of account. The Kieran Murphys of the world who've been around, they've done some really good, they've developed a really good CV. I can fully see clubs kind of making approaches and trying to get more of them involved.
Yeah, there's already names that aren't being involved with clubs. Even you look, Michael Donlan, who was with the 19s previously with Montbellew, could he be someone? Kevin O'Brien being involved with Scottstown. Not a lot of people were aware of it until
he popped up on TV.
Yeah, until he popped up on TG4.
Yeah, like, it makes perfect sense. That's Scottstown, that they've a savage ticket, like a really, really impressive ticket. Peter Donnelly is there as well, who would have been like a really highly regarded S&C coach, kind of developed a fine CV, would actually end up working with us rugby for a while as well. I think there is an element when you see Kevin on the sideline, when you hear the Jack McCarron transfer, all that stuff this year, there's definitely an element where Scottstown just went bald headed after this year and decided that this is finally the year that they want to get over the line. And it's funny, like, I know sometimes you can do this subconsciously, and maybe you're trying to connect the dots when they're not there. But there are certain elements of their game that you're watching, the way they created that last score for Conor McCarthy, for example. You think that was kind of Corofin, like they're a bit, how quickly they were to every single pass going forward, runners all off the shoulder, huge depth and width in their attack. So you can try to connect the dots. But I mean, there's another, like, talking about somebody who I'd say a lot of clubs would love to get involved. I'm sure his phone is absolutely ringing off the hook, and it just so happens that Scots ones were kind of lucky enough to get him. So that sets up a cracker. Jeez, I can't wait for that. What's the final? Like, I really think that Scottstown Glen game could be far. So hopefully I get up to this weekend. Obviously, it's great too, but I do think that game. This is one of the first years where there's real intrigue for me around every single provincial final. Like, I wouldn't, even the Leinster final on Saturday, like, I wouldn't be as confident as some people are about that. I do think you could get 4 very, very interesting games here.
Just before we get into St Brigid's, obviously Monavea Abbey were playing Castlereagh St Kevin's at the weekend. The final game in the hay shed before it was brought down 2-4 to 8 points. They'd be disappointed. They they definitely had chances to win this one, but just came up short in the end.
Yeah, and there's two sides to this. There's the chances that they had, and there's the goals that they conceded. And like the first goal is actually a really, really well worked move. It's you're sweeping on that left hand sideline, ball comes back into a foot forward, kind of dummies, drops the shoulder, takes on his man, beats him, and then so once that happens, and you have support runners, everybody just starts scrambling. So he gets through. He's got an option coming on the sideline side or on the wing. He's also got an option at the back post, which he ends up taking ball across the back post, and it's a goal. 4 minutes in, there's absolute sucker punch. Like for if your first score, you can see it as a goal. And to their credit, they respond very admirably. And I think when Glenn Kennedy kicks that free, start second half on his right, it's a 1 point game again. Like they've got it right back, and then just a complete. I don't know what it is about that end. We've seen a couple of weird goals,
Yeah.
similar goals at that ends in Tuam, but yeah, like corner forward just romp it down, hits it outside of his foot shot. It's one of those balls that hang so long in the air that by the time it actually lands, there's 3 or 4 people in the square, not in terms of, but they just naturally arrive there because the ball is hanging so long, and it just the goalkeeper loses sight of it or whatever, and it bounces off his chest and goes into the corner, and just a complete killer. But and then at the other end, 2-4, it's not, you still, even if you'd offer that to if the bunts before the game or to Monday, they still probably would have backed themselves to outshoot that, but it just didn't necessarily come off. They've had like fringe runs are funny, Paul. Like you can have weird strokes. Unfortunately, you can bottle all that emotion of a Killian McDade injury and kind of use it to your advantage, but then suddenly you kind of a game like that and you really feel his loss. So
You could eventually call up with them.
to a certain extent, I feel very sorry for him like that. I mean, with the greatest respect in the world to St Kevin's, but like if McDade is there, he's worth 2 points. Like that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's that. Anybody will tell you that. So I feel a degree of sympathy for them. But their primary job was done this year. Like this, they wouldn't have considered this bonus 30 whatsoever. But the minimum or what they actually go the main goal, 90% of their focus this year was coming back up, and they did that. So and then after that, this like you might necessarily end the season on the note you wanted, but as a season, like it was. I'm stating the obvious here. It was obviously a successful year for him.
Yeah, and a really young age profile of the team too.
Yeah, and a lot of guys who I think people would. I think a day like we've spoken on a good bit on this podcast. I think a day like that will actually stand to Glenn Kelly even more. Maybe if things aren't necessarily coming off and you're trying to force that experience. Any decent coach will often tell you learn way more from a loss than you will from a win. But I think that's true for players too. Like I think that going through games like that will only stand to you in the long run. So like the club as a club, their profile is in a very good place. It's some very talk about impressive management tickets. Everybody from Francis, obviously, but also, my father was there. John Donlan was involved in this year. Like,
Yeah.
they've really kind of knowledgeable people in the background there. So they're in a very good place. I wouldn't be one bit surprised if they try and talk about continuity, get everybody back for next year, kind of build on this year. They're not a team anybody is going to be looking forward to draw from a senior perspective. I was kind of looking at it, right, with the seedings and the fact that we're probably going to groups of four, and I'd say football will go what hurling did, and you'd end up with the Premier League quarterfinals, the top three going through. There's a couple of some really dog groups. Like there's groups that you could really end up in an absolute bear pit, which is a good thing from a neutral perspective. Like the games, those group games, even though teams don't like the fact three come out, there still could be absolute crackers because you wouldn't be able to predict it based off the four they're in. But they'd be a right challenge for anybody, whoever they draw.
Maurice, just one thing on those groups. Anis Brannock was on the podcast earlier on the year. He was saying he was hoping with the senior format that they'd bring in a home venue, an away venue, and then a neutral venue. This is because, like, if you look at the groups, there wasn't massive attendances if you have a game in Pearse Stadium early on in the senior championships. But this home and away and neutral, it seems like a perfect idea, really, to me.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I know I've been going on with this a long time, and I know I put up a tweet when I was at Spittle for the Michaels Clanning game, and somebody did say to me, all right, that it was said to me the next day when I was in Pearse Stadium, you're trying to deny club players the chance to play in Fair Stadium, which is absolutely not what I was advocating for at all. But the point that I was trying to make was that I think club venues are so much better for group games. I think atmosphere gets lost in group games. I don't think the allure is the same for club players. You can reward knockout stages, fair enough. County final, obviously, they're deserving of kind of a big stage, and you'll get a crowd in there. But the atmosphere is lost. I don't think it does as much. I'm a national reporter, so obviously I live in Galway, but I cover games up and down the country, and I'm just telling you for a fact, games in club venues are a lot better. Their atmosphere is so much better. I would contrast it to some of the best club championships in the country. Kerry, for example, a lot of their group games we played in the club championship, but we played in club venues, and they're brilliant. I think there's way more attached to it. There's even just banal stuff like the edge of rivalry. I think it's a better chance for clubs to get more people out if they've got kind of a home crowd and you can engage people that way. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I loved it. I love the idea of groups being in. And it's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing, Paul, because as a county, we're very well served by stadiums. Like June has been, as much as the people will kind of maraud the Hayshed, it's been a kind of an iconic venue for a long time. We've as a club, we played in club venues this year, and club venues are only getting better. Like we played in Middletown this year under lights. I think it was the first championship game that been hosted there since they put in those floodlights, and it was brilliant. Like it was a brilliant occasion. So I can only imagine it would be tenfold if you brought it to home or away venues. So yeah, pitches can take it now. I think, especially if we persist with the split season, from a group's perspective, a lot of these games are going to be played in August, September. So it's not as an issue where you're going to be playing games at the back end of the year. So I would absolutely love to see that happen. I don't see it happening, but I would love to see it.
Yeah, because there's even going to be more and more local derbies now, just with the way the groups are formatted. It just creates such a buzz around that game.
It does, and I do think it has a real knock-on impact on games when you're in Pure Stadium and the crowd is lost. I think players get a sense of that. I honestly do, and the flip side is true too. If the place is absolutely hopping and people are trying to lift the roof, it definitely does have an impact that way as well. So you saw what happened to United yesterday in Galatasaray. I'm not saying they were going to get quite the same level, although there's some clubs out in Connemara maybe, but no, I'm only messing. I do think, like, from a venue perspective, that it just makes perfect sense. It's not an issue from a facilities perspective anymore. It's not an issue from a pitches perspective anymore. There's probably a couple of minimums the county board might be keen to get. They're probably keen to get a gate around pitches, probably keen to get a stand, probably you have to have dugouts, all that kind of stuff. But the vast majority of clubs have that now, and I fingers crossed. It's a great idea. I'd love to see it.
Corofin obviously this weekend in Connacht's final action, 1:30 on Sunday against St Brigid's in Hyde Park. Game live on TG Car as well. Isn't it amazing though, in the middle of the club season, when a team is just strong favourites, that the game just gets completely lost?
What do you mean?
Well, like Corofin and Brigid's this week, it's kind of got completely lost because Corofin are strong favourites going into this, and there's not much people giving Brigid's a chance.
I know, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, Lashley, I like there's probably a bit of allure around the Corofin story. I think people are nationally now would have a lot of interest in that and would be paying attention to the club. And there's also helps that they would recognise a lot of the names from a Corofin perspective. But there probably would have been a lot more buzz if Brigid's had been more convincing against Molehill, and they weren't. I did that. They kind of stuttered to a certain extent into a final, which I'm sure if you talk to people in Roscommon, that's the best place. Floating in under the radar like that, they'll absolutely love that. There's kind of a feel that Roscommon did that a couple of times this year. They definitely did to Mayo as an intercount team in the championship. You've even seen some of their clubs do that in the past as well. But yeah, like it's kind of, I don't know, at one level, this is the nature of rugby, that you won't get that prolonged buzz. At the same time too, you've probably got, even from a local GA perspective, you've got the double header in Leinster, which will attract a lot of eyeballs. There's probably a degree of intrigue, Paul, in that. There's some great stories elsewhere too, like the Cushendall Neil Ulster final there's a kind of a great story around that. For the last couple of weeks, the intermediate and junior championships has been delivered in week on week, so there's probably an element of that as well, and feeding into it. And it's probably, I'd be reasonably confident to say, is it the most one-sided provincial final? I'd imagine it is. I'd say Castlehaven Dingle is 50-50. against Gosstown, a tough game to call. But Kilmacud are probably strong enough favourites right against Naas, but I'd say it's probably a lot of people have it as the most one-sided game. So all that factors in, and it probably doesn't. We're talking here midweek. It might not necessarily have the same element of excitement. I do think it'll come. Like I think by the weekend, people will be intrigued and they'll tune in to see Corofin if nothing else.
Is Brian Stack gone this weekend?
His knee was so heavily strapped in that game that it's hard to, and the fact that he came on, it's very hard to know. I think he came on. I don't. I'm guessing here. You're reading the tea leaves. You're looking on from the outside, but I'd say the plan wasn't to get for him to play that game, and then it's a real tight game, and you need that element of security, and especially when, as Mohill are chasing the game, they start peppering their full back line. Maybe that's why they got him in there. But just when you see how much strapping was on his knee, you wouldn't have any degree of confidence that you could spin that. I'm sure that's been, he dedicated himself to this for trying to get back for this game. And if there's even a small percentage chance that he can play, I'd say he will play. But you can force this to a certain extent, and then it can just come up the way. I don't know. Maybe it's because of the last Corofin game. I keep thinking of Jerk Africa, and I felt so sorry for him to see. You'd heard all week that talk was around for a while that Dylan Taunton probably wasn't going to be around. Parker Horror probably wasn't going to be around. One of their leaders or stalwarts, they're few into County Stars, is pushing himself really hard, so he's fit and available. And then he's like such a warrior that his entry actually went there early in the second half, and he still got back. He got up and got back into the line. He was actually marking Gary Sice when that play goes out, but he wasn't going to be able to soldier on. And that, I know it's different between maybe a muscle and a joint, but you wouldn't be necessarily confident when you think about it from that perspective. From a British perspective, I hope he's available. Like I do, I think he had a absolutely exceptional year from the day one where he went into Mayo, kept Tommy Conroy scoreless. No, he's on Ryder Junior that day, wasn't he? But from that day on, did a great job on Shane Walsh in in Roscommon, even though they lost past 4 the week. Conor Callan keeps them to 2 points. Like every single week, he was going out and really attacking the best friend. So from their perspective, you'd hope he's available, and he would be a huge loss if he's not.
It was interesting. We had Kieran Fitzgerald on the podcast last week, and he was talking about this rivalry between Corofin and Brigid. There's probably not so much there for the younger players, but particularly for the Gary Slices, the Mike Farrers, the Dundees, it's probably still there. And for one or two of the kind of older Brigid players, but Brigid kind of do have a lot younger of a side now. But he referenced the point, it's 2-2 now between Corofin and Brigid since that Kiltoom affair.
And I don't know. I'd say there's no doubt young players would know that. Like they would have grown up as fans of the club. Like they would have. A lot of this stuff is kind of subconscious stuff. It's subliminal, but it seeps in as you're around the club and you hear talk about. You can remember great days of the past, and you can hear the talk of it. And I'd say it might not even be explicitly referenced during the week, but there'll be no doubt about the nature of it as the build up. And you'll get journalists like me will be writing about it during the week, and as much as Player at the Night, they do that stuff filters in, like they do kind of pick up on it. So I've absolutely no doubt that that a lot of that younger Corofin, or for both clubs, like I've no doubt that they'd be fully conscious of that going into this weekend. I don't know if it has a huge amount of impact, I'm not saying in the middle of the pitch now on Sunday it's going to be in the back of their minds, but it will be something that they're conscious of, and it'll feed into, from a spectator perspective, that's exactly the kind of stuff that helps you sell a game. Like that's the stuff that maybe nationally, I'm sure there'll be a segment before this game airs on that and that kind of stuff, that it'll be the kind of a storyline that gets people invested in it.
Kevin Johnson has a few more decisions to make. His decisions with his team selection seems to be getting harder every week for him. Obviously, Malloy was away. Presumably, he's back this weekend, which should be expected. He obviously comes back in, but it's a tough decision now considering the performance he got out of some of the players he brought in against Ballina.
It is, and one thing about Corofin this year, if you actually look closely at the way they picked their team, I think they're a lot more adaptable than maybe people realise, and they're definitely picking, not definitely, but this is, in my opinion, they're picking a team based on their position fairly often. I would say Dinawal found himself in a forward line that day because they expect the Pádraig Ó Hurra to start. That's in my opinion, they thought Pádraig Ó Hurra was going to play, and he's just a perfect matchup. You could stick with him going the other way, and then it manifested he's not there, and it's a bit of a on the fly. What do you do? How do you adjust? And they kind of left it as is. But I'd say that was what drove
Will it be the same if Brian Stack plays, do you think?
I don't think so, because he's not as O'Hora with Bana was nearly more about kind of rampaging forward. He's not. I don't actually know if I think maybe I don't know if he's the best man marker. Maybe I think that stuff is overplayed. I'm
Mm.
talking from whereas I do think Brian Stack is an excellent man marker, and his skill set might not necessarily be as much these kind of rampaging runs forward. So I think that's what drove that. Beyond that, then like a lot of the kind of narrow calls. I know a lot of people were looked and think, geez, like when is Ronan Steede going to come back in here? And
Yeah.
you get a performance that you get out of Patrick Egan, who like has just kind of excelled. He's gone from strength to strength, which was Santum. And then there is that element of it's just such a dilemma from a opposition manager perspective that if you get Malloy and McHugh on the pitch together, like Denny McHugh is such a nightmare because he comes up the first half in that game, he kicks a great point, then he's back in the full back line, he's spoiling everything as they try, and he's actually the player who forced the ball out for the 45 for the first chance that Ballina have in that game. And then suddenly they go on a kind of a stretch there and towards the latter stage of the first half where they're not really scoring, they're not it actually looks like Ballina nearly have just after David, a soft enough shot for a penalty where a long ball goes in and Bernie comes out and just, I don't know, did he clip Regan in the back of the head there? It's hard to see, but you're starting to think, okay, this is maybe Balnar come to grips with this. And he comes again, like McHugh just comes, the power and pass down the stand side, kicks an absolute monster of a score again. So he's just able to, so impactful on both sides of the ball, which makes it very hard to, like, you can't really detail somebody to follow him everywhere because you don't want to be following him into the fullback line and taking yourself out of a game. But the flip side, when he comes into a game, it makes, as a matchup, it's a complete nightmare. So be very interesting to see what Bridges do in that regard. But yeah, like, sorry, to go back to your question at the start, there's some huge calls to make. Now, the only thing about Corofin, they make changes early, like always. They just get players in reasonably early. So even if Steve doesn't start, or maybe Farrell might comes out again, it would be interesting to see what they do with Lundy now. You would expect to see all of them at some point.
Liam Silk on Ben O'Carroll, you'd expect, and then probably Eddie Nolan is the other key matchup for Corofin this weekend.
Yeah, no. So we played Liam Silk definitely. I think is on O'Carroll. I'd be very confident that Eddie Nolan gets forward a bit. The other player though is Conan, who we played Bridget in July in a challenge game, and like challenge games are funny. Sometimes you can't really. Sometimes you wouldn't get a huge amount out of exact. You'd be so skeptical about how much it actually matters to the opposition, how much do they invest in it, how much do they want to show. So there's a couple of things I wouldn't read too much into those games at all. But there is a couple of small things you pick up on, all right. And one of them is, their cues. Like you'd hear how they talk to each other, you'd hear what are their calls, what are they trying to work, what they're trying to implement, all that stuff. You'd pick up on that, all right. And that's just the language of a team. Every team has a language, the way that they talk to each other or their principles of play. And one big thing with British that I would have noticed that day was they were big on, as they were attacking, they kind of flood players forward, which is a kind of traditional thing now. So you'd have maybe a huge bulk of players behind the ball, in front of the ball, kind of floating around. They wouldn't necessarily they're not like a Derry team where they have a lot of depth in behind, or even Corofin do this now actually, where you kind of flood that they're a bit more kind of, will play around on the fringes, nearly like a Sothill actually that way, that they a lot of kind of strong punch runners on the outside. But the two big things I would have noticed that day was they're big on somebody calling quarterback. So when you're in that phase, you have a kind of a +1 on the outside who you'll come back out to if things are breakdown, like an outlet. Who's just there, kind of like a point at the top. And they're big on switches. They were massive on. So the ball was all on the left hand side, right side of the pitch. Comes back to a player, and immediately the switch is called, and it's a kick pass to the other side. And a lot of teams, Paul, I think a lot of reasons that breaks down, and I'm talking not just from a club perspective, but also from intercounty, is because that switch across is too slow. It's a player running the ball, or it's a hand pass across the bus, kind of gradually going over one side back to the other side. Whereas if you can get a kick pass across and you've kind of committed defenders to one side, you can actually create matchups, you can create one-on-ones and then get scores off that. And I would have noticed Canaan did that a good bit. He would have been isolated on one wing and they would get on the ball and kick a score. And he actually did it against Boyle in the Roscommon final as well. When I was watching the highlights of that game on TG Carr, he might be, the ball will be out on the right hand side and he's out on the left, and he just come as the ball is going back across, he'll come on a loop and he'll kick a score with no play straight over the bar. So that's definitely a principle of play of theirs. Now I'd say Corofin will know that. Like I'd say they'll have watched every game since that Boyle game, and they'll drill down on that. But it does make it an interesting counterpoint that you've got two players who will be able to get forward. Eddie Nolan again I think he's invaluable both from a club and a county perspective. I think when I spoke to Davy Burke on the pitch after the Sligo game, and I asked him, I'd just been doing the stats on their season, and I noticed they hadn't scored any 45s. And so I asked him about it. You missed two, one free off the ground there and 145. I don't know if you remember, Conor Carroll had one at the end of the Dublin game when they were drawn with Dublin in Croke Park, and he missed it. And David Burke said to me, "Yeah, it's because we don't have Eddie Nolan. He's the man they need. They hadn't scored a free or a 45 off the ground for the year, not even in the league, and it was because Eddie Nolan was injured. So he, even from that perspective, is a huge plus. And again, that's not something Corofin takes back, but it's a big plus from a British perspective, all right? Yeah,
But in the end, Corofin just have too much.
I think so. Yeah, I think I think this will be like anything I've seen of British. They press kickouts. They might play a +1, but sometimes it could be very deep. Maybe even the player closest to the goal, just to stop. If there's a line break, you'd have the next player up to filter back. So I think this could be a pretty good game. And I'd give Van credit. I think they actually did try and come out to play to a certain extent. I know people are talking about the whole decision with the win thing, but I do think they tried to. I think maybe they looked at their squad and saw that they were down a couple of bodies and tried to come out and tackle Corofin. And you kind of hope that Bridges would approach the game in the same way. So I don't think they come out to sit back and think, but I just think Corofin, the strength of their squad, how well they're motoring all year, I couldn't but go with them for this weekend.
Just before we do finish, the under 19 finals were on over the weekend. Killannon won the A 3-3 to 15 points. We've seen how this benefited Corofin last year so much from winning that 19s, but it's a massive result for Killannon to win the league, the West Border title, and then the county title. But like this can really benefit their senior team if they use this right.
Absolutely, yeah. I have to say, given the nature of the conversation we've had all year in relation to what's happening in West Galway in particular, but just outside the urban belts, you see the same thing happen to North Galway over the last couple of years, and now you're starting to see evidence of it in the West. And given Corfin's stretch of domination, I couldn't but be delighted for Killannon. I think maybe if you drill down to this, you probably could have seen this coming. They've got some exceptional young players who have been coming kind of consistently over the last couple of years. It's not a flash in the pan. Like you look at their senior squad this year. I know I said it to you before about Brian Mitchell. I think he has been a total revelation for them this year. Mitchell on the other side, young Walsh. They have a lot of young coming players. And then in terms of the positive that could infiltrate, the great thing about 19s, I think, is that it's not, in my personal opinion, I know there's the age group debate is going on across the county. I think 19s is a good bridging point between your 17s, and going to 17s to 20s is a jump. It is a big jump. That's why I kind of like 19s. And I think the great thing about it is that players coming out of that with success are ready for senior football. You get an impact out of that next year. So from Jared Butler's perspective, you went into Killannon, were very competitive in your group. I think they would consider themselves unlucky to end up coming down to the last day as it did. But you have that nice kind of infiltration of players coming. You wouldn't but be delighted.
Yeah, huge for them. And overall with the 19s, like you referenced Killannon there, they're obviously won the A title, but even Kinvara in the B title, like this definitely is helping clubs that aren't like the powerhouses of senior football. We're seeing clubs come through at this.
And even as you go down the grades, I think Milltown had a lot of success in their 17s at those days, and it probably I think it's a testament to Galway that they've persisted with the age. It's kind of independent to what's going on. I know maybe there was a bit of frustration around that, definitely around the 19s last year about the organisation of that, but I think by and large a lot of this is just down to good organisation. It's down to, and then the rest of it you kind of leave it down to your clubs and how you organise it. And it's an retirement dilemma. We would have had players, Paul, like we had All Ireland winning minors last year who were being initially thought they're going to be playing 19s and junior football this year, and suddenly they become starting players for your seniors. And it's a very hard thing to balance. Do you just commit fully to the senior and take them away from 19s and playing with lads their own age and the buzz they get off that? So, but like more broadly on your point, yeah, I think that kind of stuff will only but be good for Galway football. I really hope that that is celebrated the same way success will be celebrated at a top tier, because it should be. And it's probably the big thing now is trying to retain those players that especially from a rural club perspective, you just want to get as many as them possible playing consistent football at any level, even if that's your third senior adult team. It's just once you get a kind of a talented group like that, your main priority is retention, is getting as much as them possible playing football, and hopefully pay dividends in a year or two.
Yeah, I heard Patrick Sweeney talking after. He was saying Killarney have 10 lads from that starting team that are eligible again for next year. So that's saying something already about that squad.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and and what that does for a club, the lift that gives locally. I was at a junior C Shield final in Clannan. Was it junior C? And it was a very low, a Shield final though. It wasn't it was a a lower level final. And the crowd from Clannan that was at that game was absolutely amazing. Like it was and there was like a great atmosphere after ground, and they had one of those electric lawn cutters that came out onto the pitch midway through, and it was one of those days where it was proper like rural club GA stuff. But the buzz around the place for that was amazing. So can you imagine what it's like for lads who are actually coming through as well? I think like the place must be hopping. So yeah, if you could bottle that, that's what every club is after. Like that's why underage success is so valuable, because it lifts everybody. All rising tide lifts all boats, and it lifts everybody across the club.
Yeah, there's already some of those Killarney lads you're thinking next year that are already going to be significant for the under 20s even.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I'd say I think that it'd be very interesting that the makeup of that, always interesting when new management come in terms of 20s. To what extent is it a continuation of what was there before, or to what extent are they casting it out? But the one thing going right back to the Anna Glynn's minor team, you would have been encouraged by the makeup of those squads to see lads from you're always going to have the traditional heartlands of Galway football well represented, and as they should be, but to see lads from Spiddle and Barna and beyond included can't but be good for football. So it'd be interesting to see. I mean, it would make perfect sense to see a lot more of them as it goes on. Yeah.
Before we do finish, last night the Brian Cup final was on between University of Galway. They obviously came out on top against Ulster University. But 18 Galway lads on it is unbelievable, really, when you consider the makeup of that squad. But even when you're looking at some of the younger players, Liam O'Keneally started wing forward, Killian O'Curran come on, James McLaughlin kicked 3 points. The players around that age and those type of players, well, I just got the sense watching that these are players that can really have significant years for Galway this year.
Yeah, but the first thing that is a savagely talented NUIG team, like a really, really the Galway lads obviously, but you throw Ryan Runhu and Tommy Conroy in on top of that, and even some of the other lads will come in there. Like they've got like some exceptional footballers in that group, and you're looking at anytime you see a team list, the first thing I think after you kind of scan your names through, and then you look through the replacements to see like what names do you recognise. The first three teams you see named in the subs are Daniel Farty, O'Curran, and James McLaughlin. You think, wow, this is a stacked team. So and it's again a team. A lot of those lads would have played freshers football with. One of the positive maybe from a NUIG perspective is that they have the same crew involved all the way through. So Maurice Brosnan is involved as much as he is with the freshers team as he is with the Sigerson team. And a lot of his coach tickets like Kieran Murphy and Paddy Moran would be there across those teams as well. So they know these lads intimately. Even when Tommy Conroy suffered that horrific injury in Dangan just before half time, I'll never forget that, because one of those weird senses where you knew exactly when he went down what had happened. But a year later, he would have done all the stats for the Sigerson team. He was up, was still there, was still involved, which is unfortunately, Paul, is a dying thing in college football. It's because of the drive of the intercounty manager and the nature of the new season. It's not as common as maybe some people might realise. And then from a Galway perspective, both from it will stand to Galway. A lot of those lads you mentioned, we'd hopefully see the likes of James McLaughlin, we hope to see maybe kick on from a Galway perspective senior next year, but also just what it does for lads who maybe aren't on the sub goalkeeper. There is a clubmate of mine, Aaron Fahy, who also would have been sub goalkeeper with Barna this year. He went to the station somewhere, but he would have a really talented goalkeeper. He's been very good in the league. His kickouts are brilliant, but he's got James Kane in front of him, who, I mean, I think maybe isn't as appreciated as he should be locally. I think he's an absolutely exceptional goalkeeper, and he's gotten so much better over the last 2 years. So it's just a very difficult thing. But what it will do for him to be exposed to that, and what he'll be able to bring back to the Barn and a lot of filter in, I think is a brilliant thing. So yeah, very encouraging story. I think it's their first title since first league title since the 70s. Somebody said to me this morning, which is fairly incredible. Carl Sweeney kind of leading the line there again. There's a guy who's played a huge amount of football, but it's clearly standing to him. So it's a very positive story from a Galway for Galway football from like multiple perspectives.
Yeah, that's a huge win for them. They look forward now to the Sigerson Cup. That's all we do have time for on today's show. Thanks a million to Maurice for coming on.